All right, in this video, we're going to talk about the Fabric Capacity Metrics app. In my job, I end up talking through this app with lots of people that are trying to troubleshoot their capacity or understand the data that are in here. There's lots of really good information in the metrics app, but sometimes early on, people are confused by all the information or how to get the most from it. So I thought I'd make a video to just share what I look for when I go through it with someone that's troubleshooting their capacity, and maybe share some tips and tricks that may help you as well. So hopefully you've already installed the metrics app. I'm not going to cover that here. So when you get to the metrics app, some of the first things I show people is one, there's this little icon here button, and if you click that, it'll take you to this page. And I always encourage people to read the available documentation before they start interpreting the data. There's lots of good information in the docs. This blog article is also really useful as well. It has a lot of great information about bursting and smoothing and the new throttling policies that were put in place last October. So definitely encourage you to read the docs before you get into this. But once you're in the metrics app here, some other good information is most of the visuals have a lot of good information in the little question mark icons. So if you hover over those, you can see a description of the information and values in there. So that's really useful. Also, once you start using the app, if you aren't seeing what you expect or things look a little different, it may be because there's different filters in place. So you can always just hit the reset button up here to reset and get back to the starting position for it. So you set it up in the metrics app, you give one capacity, but once you set it up, you can see all the capacities you have available to you. I just have these two. This is just a trial capacity. So let's start walking through the compute page. I'm not going to cover the storage page in this. I don't get a lot of questions about that. It's relatively newer, and there's be enough content just with the compute content. All right. So once you're looking at a certain capacity, I'm going to cover this visual and then talk here and then go here, and then we'll drill through to the detail page. So up here, you have some options here to choose what metric you want to look at in this visual. Almost always, I leave it on capacity units, CU. Although sometimes it's useful to look at the users one as well, just to see how much concurrency is going on, how many total unique users there are consuming stuff from this capacity. There really isn't a y-axis here. You can hover over these to see the metric value. So that's whatever one is selected there. So in this case, those are capacity units. You can do that, but those by themselves don't tell you too much. When I'm looking at this visual, it's usually for just relative purposes. So I'm looking for two things. Really, are there obvious patterns in the usage? Is it flat? Is it, Mondays are always high kind of thing? But also which workloads they're using. And I've been doing a lot of stuff with data sets and paginated reports and report bursting lately. So I've got a lot of data set and paginated stuff here. And if there's lots of too many blues and greens here and you can't tell which is which, you can always just hover over here to see the item kind. So this is a data set. This is a paginated report. So this visual is really useful as a cross filter for other visuals. So one thing is it shows you when the capacity units actually happen. So it's sort of unsmooth, if you're familiar with the smoothing concept that we'll talk about. Whereas this one over here is you're looking at the smooth usage. And so over here, it's really useful to see like where did the big capacity unit spend happen. So it's a great cross filter. And so what I typically do is I'll have the person, click below the axis on one day. And we'll talk in a minute. There's a good effect of what happens when you do that over here in terms of the number of data points that you see. But I typically will use it to filter this visual below. And so this visual shows you, all the items that are consuming capacity. It tells you the workspace, the item type, and then the name of the item, as well as how much capacity units it's consumed in the selected time period. So if there's no cross filter set up here, and quick tip, you can also hover over the little filter icon here to see which cross filters in place. So you can see, I see the included, Tuesday, the 23rd. So that's useful to see which cross filters are in place for the visual that you're looking at. The next thing I always use this as a cross filter for is, so you can get to the day level, but if you right click here, you can actually do this expand to the next level. You can also do show next level, but this expand to the next level has a nice effect that it will put here the day and the hour once you do that, and you can get more granularity of when did these big capacity consume events happen, and so you can scroll across here and see. And so sometimes you get to the end and it doesn't show all the days yet. So if you wait a couple seconds, you can see that it's working here. You'll then be able to scroll further forward to see those. In my case, I was interested on, I think it was the 23rd, where I had some more activity there. And so now if I click here and I look at my cross filter, you can see that both the day and the hour are in the filter. So now I can see, okay, exactly what was consuming capacity. This is updated now, and I can see, what my top items were, right? And so this is really useful. I also usually take a look at the users there. But again, I'm looking here for, are there, for again, patterns? Is there 1, 2, 3 things that are taking way more capacity than everything else, like this case, and I want to focus on those if I'm experiencing throttling, for example, or is there a whole bunch of things that are all taking a similar amount, which would be good to know. It might mean more work to optimize a bunch of things, but it's good to know. The other thing I usually point to people is this report page tooltip that's here. So if you just leave your mouse and hover over it, you'll see an operation breakdown. And this is really important for as what type of optimization may be needed if this item is taking more capacity than it should, right? And if I, for example, go to this data set here, and then I'll show you a different data set in a second. This one is, we're taking a ton of query and not so much on the refreshes. I actually didn't do any refreshes on this one in this time period. And then if I look at another one, let me see this one here. Yeah, this one's also query. So with this one here, we see query and data set or scheduled refresh or on-demand refresh. And so depending on what we see here, it changes the conversation. If query is the dominant thing, then we're going to get into conversations about, optimizing the model, optimizing the DAX, optimizing the report design to minimize the number and size of the queries that are coming from the report to the data set. But if it's a refresh, if there's tons and tons of refresh there, then we're going to talk about, using incremental refresh, and you got query folding happening, those types of things to minimize the capacity units consumed during the refresh process. Okay, and you can also see like analyze in Excel usage there, because that sometimes can consume a lot of capacity too. One more thing, people sometimes miss that there's these other options here. I think it just starts out with performance delta, but you can add the item size and overloaded minutes. The item size really isn't relevant for capacity utilization there, but sometimes it's useful for other things. And there's actually a good Guy in a Cube video with Marco Russo that talks about what this means. It isn't your true model size. You could see very low numbers here because the data set is temporarily evicted because it's not being actively used, or it could be quite a bit higher than you expect because there's lots of in-memory cache queries, for example. The performance delta can point you to potential issues. And again, if you hover over the question mark, you'll see a definition and description of the performance delta and what the different colors means. So that may be worth noting if you do see a significant degradation in the performance for a certain item, but it's a relative thing. And so it could be on something that isn't taking up a lot of capacity units. So usually I don't spend a lot of time talking about that. All right, so now if we go to this one here, this one can also be very useful. So I'm going to remove that filter there. And so this first tab is showing the utilization. And so the first things I look for when somebody shows me their metrics app usually are two things. One is I'm looking at the relative amount of red and blue. Red are interactive operations and blue are background operations, and they're smoothed differently as described in those documentation pages. The red stuff is smoothed out over 5 minutes. The blue stuff is or more, and the blue stuff is smoothed out over 24 hours. And so, again, if I see lots and lots of blue up here, that's usually a sign of a significant problem, and we're going to talk about optimizing those background operations. And the red can be, again, bad models, bad DAX, high concurrency, that kind of stuff. Okay. And I'm also going to look at where the smooth lines are hitting relative to the percent available in the capacity. And if auto scale is enabled, you'll see the yellow trace here of auto scale kicking in and turning back off. And so I'm looking at are they going above the 100%, and then how far are they going above the 100%? Okay. All right. The next thing we'll talk if they're experiencing throttling. We'll go to the throttling tab. And the first thing I'll usually point out about this, again, this is a trial capacity. It's just me messing around on here, so there's very little usage here. Sometimes it's useful. You can, turn it to log scale if it's very low. You can use the zoom sliders as well. The other thing you can do is, again, use this as a cross filter. And what you'll see is you see not many data points here, so there's some sampling that's happening. But if the scope here is to 1 day or less, then you'll see a value at every time point, and that can make it easier to make a selection here for drill through, et cetera. So the key thing I point out to people here is they'll say, "Hey, I'm experiencing interactive delay," and it's like, no, that doesn't actually kick in until this reaches 100%. This is here to show you proactively sort of how close you got to getting that penalty. And so you can, again, do the same with interactive rejection and background rejection as well. The overages tab, I don't really use too often. It can be interesting to see, when it's going up and when it's burning back down. But usually, we spend time on the utilization or throttling tabs. All right. The other thing that's useful just in general is for this page, if for some you can't see as well as you want, don't forget you've always got like focus mode. You can blow up this visual temporarily. Also, if you want to focus, the types of things you're looking at, depending on what your scenario is, you have this item kind filter here, but then you also have the filter panel here where you can say click on a certain visual, and then add some filters over here to help get to the information you're looking for. All right. And so now let's talk about drill through. And so, it does make it easier when you're filtered down over here to actually pick a point here. It may also help you to go to the log scale if it's way down here. But if it's way down here, you probably don't have a problem and don't need to do this anyway. But you can do that. You can also make this selection from any of these pages. I'll do it from utilization, but you can click here, and then this explore button will activate, and then you can click on it and go to the time point detail. And so the time point detail page, the scope is a 30-second time window. That's how all the metrics and stuff for this are calculated, is in 30-second window increments. And you can see this chart here where you are, and say again, not much going on here, but if you see a feature here, a peak or whatever, and you missed it a little bit, you can always go here and right click and drill through again to move the scope to that time point. Okay. So here you can see, like the count of operations that are happening. You can see your skew that this capacity is. This is a free trial. And it's a F64. So it shows you how many capacities you have in each 30-second window. Okay, and then you have these visuals here. I'm going to switch over. Hopefully there's some activity for this one as well. And often I don't need to go to the drill through page. Usually from the first page, you can tell, which items are driving your most usage and which operations against those items are driving the most consumption, and go from there. But this can be helpful as well. So here you have two visuals that are the same, but one's filtered for interactive operations and one's for background operations. And so the first thing I look at here is the relative numbers here for these totals, to see what percent of the base capacity it is. And again, if I'm talking to somebody, they probably are in an overage situation. So one of these will be much higher than the other and probably over 100%. And so again, that'll focus discussion. Are we having a background optimization discussion or an interactive optimization discussion? And then what you'll see here here are the things that have been smoothed into the current time window. So from up here, it'll be something within the last 5 minutes that got smoothed into this 30-second window. And for background operations, you'll see stuff over the last 24 hours that may have been smoothed into this window. And you can scroll to the right here and you can actually see the smooth start and smooth end. And up here, for interactive, you'll almost always see 5 minutes here. There are some scenarios where if the smooth value would take too big a hit on your capacity, it'll actually smooth it out to up to just over an hour. But almost always people see this 5 minute smooth start and end here. And so the values that you really want to look at, and again, you probably got this information from the first page, but really it's this time point, total CU. And so how these two values relate to each other is a 5 minute window would have 10 30-second windows within 5 minutes. And so what you'll see here, typically, if it's smoothed over 5 minutes, is this value will be 10 times less than this value. But this is sort of the size of the event that got smoothed. And so this is where I'll often like to sort this descending to say, okay, what are the big things? Especially if I'm in an area where, overage is starting to happen. I can say, what are the things that are, really taking too much off of this capacity? You also can see, if a certain operation was throttled, and typically that doesn't mean that was the thing that was causing the issue. It could be the thing that happened right before it that took your capacity into a penalty state. But that is sometimes useful information. The background one is the same kind of thing, and you'll see same thing. Since this is smoothed over 24 hours, there's 1,440 minutes in a day, which would mean this number divided by 2880 would get you your time point, how much was smoothed into this window, and then this is the sort of the size of the event. All right, and then I really don't look at the overages too much down here. The burn down table can be interesting and again, if you hover over here, it'll explain like the minutes to burn down is, if nothing else hits the capacity, this is what it would take to burn down the overage coming from analysis services, for example. A couple other points. If I go back to the main page here, is this is you install it as a template app, but once it's installed, it's your report, it's your data set. So just like other reports, you can edit it. So you can go into edit mode here. It can be useful to select a visual to see like which columns and measures are being used in that visual, so that you can modify things. You can add a page. You can add or rearrange existing visuals if it's more useful to you and the usage on your capacity. You also can create your own report. So you can go to Power BI Desktop and you can go to Get Data and Power BI Semantic Models. And you can pick the capacity metrics app there and build the data set against that. That can be a little tricky, but you can do it. Also, you can if I go to the workspace that's hosting the capacity here, I can, if it isn't already, you can go to workspace settings, premium, and then you can put this workspace on a premium capacity to enable you to query it and interact with it more. One example is a other video I did recently where I use Power Automate to hourly go and ping my capacity and say, hey, what's my metrics for all those throttlings? Am I at, am I getting at 80, 100% of interactive rejection, for example? And then based on that, dynamically come up with an email that says, hey, everything's okay, or your capacity's in trouble, type things. And you could trigger other actions as well. So check that out if you haven't seen that one. All right. And so I think that's all I wanted to cover. Again, sharing my tips for using the metrics app. If you have your own, please post them in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks.